Time for our news hour for a Monday night, and on the program tonight, Hollie Hughes, one of the Liberal senators for New South Wales. Hollie, good evening.
Good evening, Clinton. How are you?
Great to have your company on the program. First time for 2024. Have you had a restful break over Christmas, New Year?
Well, we did. We were actually up in the Gold Coast last week. So when I saw you on the TV program we were on together, it was 5:45 in the morning for me up in Queensland. So it's nice to be back on Sydney time. But, look, it's been lovely to get the kids away. And we actually only managed to get 2 days of rain, which, for everyone that's been looking at what's been happening on the Gold Coast and particularly southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, there was a couple of days where it was pretty wet, but still plenty of time by the pool, so it was lovely.
Now just tell me that on Hollie, when we spoke on the Today Show last week, you were technically on holidays. Is that the life of a politician, that often while you're on holidays with your family, that you're still expected to make public appearances, to work in some way?
Look, absolutely. And I think, I'm in opposition now, so certainly from keeping abreast of what's happening and keeping an eye on what's happening and continuing to engage with the public is important. But I think what this government misses the point is being in government means holidays don't really get to happen that much. So particularly if you're a minister, you are on at all times, and particularly if an issue blows up in your portfolio, just saying, well, I'm on leave with the kids this week isn't really... and I know we talked about this briefly last week. Everyone does need a break, but it's how you time it and manage it, but also expecting that if something does happen, particularly in your portfolio area, that's the end of it. I know when we lost government, one of our former ministers said to me when I asked them what they were going to do for the holidays, they were like, I'm actually going to read a book and lie by a pool, because for the previous sort of 4 or 5 years, they'd been in portfolios that had required work over that entire Christmas summer period. So, from opposition, you don't have the same sort of ministerial responsibilities, but certainly as a politician generally, being in touch with the community, what's going on and still talking to people, I think is important.
I'm sure no politician likes to lose government, but in my day job, I cover New South Wales politics, and speaking to quite a few of the former coalition government ministers late in the year, they were looking forward to the summer holidays, because particularly those National Party MPs who travel from the bush into Sydney, some former ministers who are now shadows, but they were in charge of pretty big portfolios, pretty happy that they felt that for the first time in about a decade, for these pollies, they were going to actually have a break.
Well, look, and that is, interestingly, probably the one thing in opposition that you do get a break from. But I have to say, opposition is not the best place to be, and I'm hoping we won't be in it for terribly much longer. But I've never been busier, and I think that's from an opposition perspective. You certainly don't have the resources that governments do in doing that work. So, I think particularly those in the shadow portfolios, it still is very, very busy, and it's important that you're busy and on top of things, because it's our job to really hold the government to account. And, we're increasingly seeing this government needs quite a lot of being held to account.
It's a really important point you make there. If it's a weak opposition, it's going to be a weak government.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when they come in with no agenda, and if we think back to the 2020 election, 2019 election, I'll tell you, I don't know, between COVID, I think we all lost a few years, but 2019 election, it was, 2022 election when we lost, Albanese came in with just, it's all going to be the same, we're a safe pair of hands, nothing's going to change, don't worry about it. And then we've seen that, an opposition that came into government with no plan still doesn't know what they're doing.
131873 is our number. Hollie Hughes is with me this hour for the news hour. We're going to get stuck into some of the political issues of the day. If you want to have your say, you're most welcome to. You can send text messages, and I've got some text messages to get to. 0460 873 873. Now, there were stories in both the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian today about female representation in the Liberal Party. Apparently in Queensland, it looks like there'll only be one woman standing for a lower house seat. And I know you're in the Senate, you're on the upper house. In New South Wales, there was recently a vacancy in the upper house in the Senate with Maurice Payne retiring, and that position's been taken by Dave Sharma. So that went to a male candidate. And there has been apparently in Victoria some frustration from female figures within the party about the lack of female representation. As a female in the Liberal Party, is it a problem for you?
Look, this issue, honestly, just seems to get rehashed when people don't have enough things to talk about. But I just will make the point, Maurice Payne did resign from the Senate and was replaced by Dave Sharma. But earlier in the year, we had the death of Jim Molan, and he was replaced by Maria Kovacic. So the New South Wales Senate team is 2 men, 2 women. So we're 50%. So,
Okay.
a lot was made of Maurice being replaced by a man.
Yep.
Not a lot was made of Jim being replaced with a woman. So, you've got to kind of balance these things out and keep them in perspective. The Queensland division, it's not really for me to comment on because each division does its pre-selection processes differently, and the Liberal Party in Queensland is actually the LNP, so it's a different, again, situation from where I am in New South Wales. But the nominations, I understand, don't close for another week. The expectation and the talk at the moment is that a woman hasn't nominated. So it's pretty difficult for the party to select a woman if a woman hasn't nominated. And that, to me, is actually one of the more extraordinary things because for my sins, I served on the New South Wales State Executive for 14 years, which meant I sat on every single state and federal pre-selection for a very, very long time. Plus, I also served on our federal executive for a number of years. So I've been across this process in New South Wales for a long time, and there might have been complaints that a woman didn't win a particular pre-selection, but to me it does seem very unusual that a woman hasn't even nominated.
Well, why do you think that's the case? Why don't women want to go into politics?
Look, I mean, we just had a quick discussion about you're never on holidays, so I think, the reality is a lot of people can look at federal politics in particular and how that's going to work for their family. We spend at least, half a year in Canberra, usually around, that sort of full 6 months of the year in Canberra. And then coupled with that, and this is what I don't think a lot of people understand, how sort of it works, because, it drives me insane when people say it's a parliamentary break, makes it sound like, everyone gets those holidays in between. When most of those weeks I would be travelling 5 days, if not, at minimum sort of 2 days in those sort of off-Canberra weeks because of committees that we all sit on that require us to go to hearings, and being the federal parliament, we do those hearings all across the country.
Oh, that's a very good point. The same thing happens at state level because I report on a lot of them. When we're talking parliamentary breaks, it's a break from the legislative process of passing legislation, question time, the theatre of Parliament, but all those committees, they still sit. And over the years, a lot of people have said, Hollie, and I might have thought the same thing at one point, maybe we should get rid of the Senate, maybe we should get rid of the upper house. But those committees and inquiries that you do preside over, a lot of scandals and a lot of drama emerges from those committees that we wouldn't find out about without them.
Well, and the whole point of an upper house, and particularly the Senate, is the house of review. So we are there, and I guess from an opposition perspective, what's really interesting, if you're a member of the House of Representatives in the opposition, you've got almost zero chance of winning a vote because the government has the numbers by the very nature that the government's formed by a majority in the House of Representatives. So you are very unlikely to win a vote in the House of Representatives from opposition. That's not the case in the Senate. So we will quite often be successful in the Senate at getting, whether it's amendments up, whether it is inquiries into certain things that we are trying to look at. So this includes, these closing the loopholes, same job, same pay legislation that Labor pushed through with Jackie Lambie and David Pocock at the very end of the year. But there's still a whole tranche of things that are being looked at in that legislation to make sure that businesses and their employees aren't negatively impacted. And these inquiries occur over all sorts of legislation. And it's really important in the sense that, no one is perfect, and unintended consequences can exist within policy, even with the best of intentions. And these processes, and particularly Senate inquiries, quite often will weed out from the different stakeholders, from those that are going to be actually impacted by policy changes, what those unintended consequences are. And it actually gives the Parliament as a whole a chance to respond better and just tighten things up and fix them along the way, rather than something being a catastrophic failure and having, massive negative impacts in particular sectors. So it is a very important process, and I guess it's something that your listeners might not sort of naturally understand because, as you point to, the theatre of Parliament and question time. I mean, question time is important, but it's certainly not where the legislative governing is happening.
Not a lot is really achieved in question time when it comes down.
I remember when Maria Kovacic came in, the new senator replaced Jim Molan. She was sitting behind me and we walked out to get a West End. And she said, "Oh my God, Hol, this is an extreme sport for you, isn't it?" Like, she's like, "Oh my God, yeah, you've got to get in there." So that is sort of that theatre part.
Yeah.
But, these inquiries, these processes, and a lot of stuff that goes through the Parliament does go through in what we would call a non-contentious way. It's supported by everyone, or the predominantly, the vast majority.
And it's the process that's got to be you go through to get legislation done.
Yeah, and it's the process that's worked through. So there are very important things that happen in the background that, aren't the really sexy, fun parts that people like to see, and that gladiatorial almost combat.
Yep.
Where actual work gets done in some, at times, not always, sensible ways.
So what it might be is some of the natural, there's this reality, some responsibilities that women have and men have tried to step up to the plate in most families, but that may be enough to discourage women from seeking a pre-selection. I've got quite a few people want to have their say on these issues of women in the Liberal Party. Ivan has a thought. G'day, Ivan.
G'day, how you going, Clinton?
Good, mate.
Yeah, look, I've been following this, fairly closely, and everyone's whinging about not enough women, in the Liberal Party. Now, if Australia's being governed by Labor and all the female teals are on their side, so if Labor's got all these female MPs, why is Australia struggling? Why is Australia in so much trouble at the moment?
Is Australia in trouble at the moment, Hollie?
Look, I don't think it's because of the women. I think it's because of the Labor government that Australia's not in a great place at the moment. But, Ivan, I'll tell you secretly, just, between you and I, the Labor Party has a quota system, and quite often they use that quota system in the Senate, where it's quite easy for the party to pick the candidates and put them in. So the Labor Party have a lot of women in the Senate, and I got to tell you, it's not, you wouldn't exactly say, well, that's the best and brightest on offer. And so, when you're trying to look at a quota system, this is where, when you go into it, and it's why I've never supported one, when it's about filling a number rather than who are the best mix of people to work towards our policy objectives and the values of our party, I think that's when you run into trouble.
So you don't want to see a quota system, Ivan?
No.
Good on you, Ivan. Thank you for your call, mate. We've got lots of people want to have their say on this. We'll come back with more calls for Hollie Hughes and women in the Liberal Party. We'll talk about some other issues as well. 131 873 is our number. News Hour with Hollie Hughes, Liberal Senator in New South Wales. 131 873. On the text line, Ken says, "I'm so sick of the old not enough women in Parliament line. It should be the best person for the job, and it shouldn't matter if it's a man or a woman." Hollie, Harry in Cecil Hills would like to have his say. Hello, Harry.
Good evening, guys. Look, about women in politics, I think, Clinton, you would agree, it should be more based on merits if the job can be done.
100% agree.
And I was surprised to see Gisela Kapdarian on the list there. I just hope she doesn't, because she doesn't bring her ethnic issues in the Parliament. We want people, I'm talking about the Liberal Party, the woman, they should be more concerned about Australia's problem, not ethnic issues like Kapdarian is really obsessed about, the ancient history, as Mike Jeffries would say. Don't bring your ancient garbage here. We want Australia for the Australians. We don't want these ethnic people bursting about the ethnic issues and lobbying for these sort of things. We want what's good for Australia.
Reality is we've all come from somewhere, Harry, and I think it frustrates a lot of Australians when people from overseas bring their problems from their country and make them our problems. And I think we need to look ahead yeah, sure, remember where you came from, but we all need to look ahead. Good on you, Harry. I agree. It should be the best person for the job. I guess the issue, though, is, Harry, is there still enough opportunity for women to enter Parliament? And given how Hollie's explained that the time pressures, that the reality of being a politician is that can be a challenge. One of the reasons, Hollie, this has popped up is because the Teals and the apparent threat of the Teals in Queensland. Now, they were very successful in New South Wales and Victoria. They did run female candidates. There was no male Teal candidate at all. Do you think, and is the Liberal Party concerned about what they could do in Queensland?
Look, I think there's a whole lot of issues to be looked at with the Teals. And, I mean, I've got to tell you, it looks like a bunch of school captains from private schools getting together when you see them. And it's, they don't have a balance of power. They've achieved very little, if anything, at all since coming in. We've seen, and I'll just come back to Harry's point about Giselle Kaptarian, who we have pre-selected for North Sydney. Giselle has a huge wealth of experience and is a very, very capable woman who does have an Armenian background, but she's also been pre-selected in a seat that has a very, very strong Armenian community. So people in the House of Representatives do tend to be a reflection of their communities, but she's also a very long-term skilled corporate history and career that will bring a great depth of talent to the House of Reps, certainly more than the Teal Kalia Tink has brought, and particularly the disgrace and embarrassment that she brought onto North Sydney, along with her colleague Sophie Scompes up in Mackellar, when they basically supported the Greens motion in support of Hamas after the pogrom on the 7th of October. So I would prefer to sell Giselle Kaptarian there over Kalia Tink any day of the week. I don't know how effectively they're working together. I think, as I said, when you put a group of former school captains from private schools together, that all think they're the top dog, I'm not quite sure that that's the best recipe for a collegiate working environment. But I think the biggest fallacy is that they're independent. They are fundamentally a party. They are funded by one source overwhelmingly with Mr. Holmes of Court. So, there needs to have a look at whether or not they should be able to legitimately run as Teal independents, or that they should be recognised as a political party, because it is how they operate. They're all like a little cabal there together. They post photos of themselves doing everything together. They act like they're a party, and they're, all their sort of materials and volunteers and groups and everything is sort of coming from that same base. So I think them being able to continue to run under this false line that they're, local community independence is a joke. They are, and they're, we're going to change politics. Well, they're politicians now. That's just the reality. I don't know why people have this obsession of, somehow being a politician in politics is the wrong place for you. Like, it's just it's extraordinary. You want people good at politics, because that's actually that's the business. You need to be able to negotiate, move things through. At
the last election, Zali Steggall increased her majority for the seat of Warringah, and which did surprise me a little, because she didn't seem to achieve a great deal in her first term. Now, it'll be her second term, and then it'll be the other first terms for the other Teal independents. Do you think the electorate will sit back and actually assess what they've done in Parliament over their terms?
Well, I hope so, and I hope that they have a very good look at their voting record, because overwhelmingly they have voted with the Labor Party and the Greens. And the seats that they represent certainly would not adhere to economic policies that are being put forward by the Labor Party and the Greens. So whilst they were elected on a platform that was fundamentally climate change, when you look at what the broader impacts are when it comes to economic issues, what is happening in industrial relations, what's happening in national security, these now, what were blue ribbon Liberal seats once upon a time, and had former Prime Ministers as members in them, now have zero seat at the table when it comes to some of these absolutely critical issues.
I've just got a question here from Chris on the text line. Ask Hollie, why has a woman never been good enough to be a Liberal Party leader?
Look, I don't think that's true in the sense that there hasn't been one that's been good enough. It's a very I'm trying to think how to phrase this because I'm not
Gladys was at a state level. Gladys was at a state level.
And Gladys was a fantastic premier at a state level. She was absolutely overwhelmingly supported, across the board in New South Wales. So we've certainly had Gladys in New South Wales. There have been incredible women as House of Representatives members, whether it be Julie Bishop, even Bronwyn Bishop. We seem to do quite well with the bishops. But there have been some outstanding women that have gone up. I mean, Helen Coonan was the first woman that she was in the Senate that held a finance portfolio. I think like everything, it's an evolution. We've gone from politics in Australia very, very broadly and correctly was old white men. It used to be that. And women have been entering politics more and more. And in fact, the Liberal Party had the first ever woman elected. The Liberal Party had the first ever female minister. We have actually had an awful lot of firsts when it comes to female representation. But as time progresses, I have no doubt that we will see a female leader, and we have Susan Lee as Deputy Opposition Leader now.
Just lastly, Hollie, on the Teals, and some of the polls are now pointing in this direction with a 50-50 split on a two-party preferred vote between the Coalition and Labor. If there is minority government and the independents, like they did when Julia Gillard became Prime Minister, need to make a call of who they're going to support, those independents who are representing traditional Conservative seats, do you think they will have a duty to back a Liberal National Independent coalition over a Labor coalition, despite the fact probably politically, ethically, they're more in line with Labor thinking?
Look, it would certainly be interesting. That would also be looking to a two-election strategy. As I said to you, I'm very hopeful that when Australians go back to the poll, that they will, I think a lot of Australians already are having significant buyer remorse with the Albanese government, that this will be a one-term government. But minority government, particularly in the fragility of the House of Representatives makeup at the moment, it isn't, it is certainly one of the possibilities that it could occur. I would have thought in a number of those seats, if the Teals sided with the Labor government, and it would have to be a Labor-Greens coalition, remember, it wouldn't just be Labor and the Teals, they would have to be in a coalition with the Greens. I think that would be quite upsetting. And as I said, the economic policies, industrial relations policies, the national security policies, defence policies, these matter as much, if not more, than climate change. Energy security is going to be a huge issue in the next election. And that's, those sorts of matters, they need to be looked after by the grown-ups, not people still running around playing student politics and activism, which we know that's what the Greens are. And, if the Teals were to go in that direction, they would certainly be getting into bed with the Greens.
On the North Sydney electorate, Brian on the text line says, happy that a capable woman has been pre-selected for the Liberal Party for the seat of North Sydney. Kylie Tink and all of her Teal colleagues is much ado about nothing, so the Liberal candidate only has to work hard in the electorate, stand for something, and victory is there for the taking. Hollie Hughes is my guest this hour. Coming up next, we'll talk about the Prime Minister's travel.
You have to see it to believe it, right? But what if what you're seeing, reading or hearing is carefully curated to make you believe a lie? I'm Deb Knight, and Season 2 of my podcast, Anatomy of a Scam, is out now. Learn the warning signs and how to bolster your digital defence against a new arsenal of artificial intelligence. Anatomy of a Scam is made in collaboration with CommBank. Stay CommBank safe with security features that can help protect you from scams and fraud.
Great to have your company on the program tonight. Airbus Albo will be back in the skies throughout the year, particularly in the second half of the year. The Fin Review today reporting that it'll be a fairly hectic back 6 months in 2024, an average of one trip a month overseas for the Prime Minister. And some of them will be important trips. He'll attend CHOGM, which is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and that'll be on Samoa. And it'll be the first attended by King Charles, so he wouldn't want to miss that. He may well attend the annual United Nations Climate Change Summit, because apparently we want to host the Climate Change Summit, similar one in 2026. So he needs to go to this one to lobby other countries to support our bid to hold the Climate Change Summit. He's going to be busy once again. Hollie, does he travel too often?
Look, I think, yes, last year he certainly did, and he was more focused on pushing his international credentials than perhaps being focused on what was actually mattering to Australians, which we all know was cost of living crisis. I mean, I agree with you that he should go to CHOGM. It's absolutely critical, I think, that he is at that meeting, being King Charles' first CHOGM meeting. But I do have a giggle to myself every time, someone makes reference to the fact King Charles and Queen Camilla are coming to Australia at the end of the year, because we know that it'll be those in the Republican movement who are falling over themselves to get to meetings with both the King and Queen. You can see it now. But look, there are a lot of meetings that the Prime Minister should attend. The COP meeting, would you send Chris Bowen anywhere to represent us? So
No.
that may, he gave a welcome to country in Dubai. Like, seriously, this guy is just living in an alternate universe to the rest of us. So Albanese may have finally, hopefully he does a reshuffle at some point and Chris Bowen is relegated, if not to the backbench, to the history books of politics. But, the Prime Minister seems to put himself out on this international stage whilst having very little clue and very little concept of what Australians are facing, and his need to actually focus on domestic issues is incredibly important. And the ministers that he has, whether you look at what Dreyfus and O'Neill and Giles did with the release of the detainees and a number of issues around national security related, they're not up to the task. They are certainly not up to the task to just be left to their own devices. And we've only seen today Tanya Plibersek rule out on environmental reasons support of Hastings, which was in both Victoria and proudly by Bowen and his renewable offshore wind zealotry as this huge opportunity for Victoria to develop offshore wind and have this wonderful port. And now Tanya's put the kibosh on that.
Yes.
So, this is a government in complete disarray. So perhaps that's why he's out of the country so often, because he doesn't know how to keep them together. I think probably in Queensland, where they're going to have a state election at the end of the year, probably Stephen Miles is pretty happy. Albo probably won't be around too much to pop up there, because I don't think he's going to do him any favours in Queensland.
The problem is there, Stephen Miles will be there, though. That's going to be a problem for Labor,
Stephen
surely.
Miles, I reckon he was a Christmas gift to David Christopher. They should have put a big bow on him and said, "There you go, David, Merry Christmas." He's just appalling. But I do think, and it's like we've talked about previously with the holidays. Yeah, everyone needs a break. Everyone needs to have a break. So what they did to Scott Morrison was appalling. We need to get back to being grown-ups and accept that, people do take a break from work. We don't need to attack a politician because they had a week's holiday with their family. The Prime Minister does need to be at some of these international meetings.
Absolutely.
But the whole point of cabinet government is that you have ministers responsible for different areas of policy that are and should be able to represent the country on behalf of the Prime Minister, particularly when we have issues like cost of living crisis that we need to contend with. And, we're seeing this lack of leadership, this vacuum, whether it's the anti-Semitism rise that we're seeing, because there has been no leadership from this government, but particularly from Albanese. And so I think it is important that if, he's serious about being the Prime Minister of Australia, not our representative out on the international stage, that he does start to turn his mind to the domestic issues. But I'm not quite sure that's high on his agenda. Lucky for us, I guess, that ASEAN's in Australia, because otherwise that would have been another trip.
Certainly would have been. Lastly, we're almost out of time. Golden Globe Awards was on today. Now, in television, Succession beat The Bear, and also The Crown, the winners today. Have you seen any of those series?
Okay, so I've seen The Crown and I've seen The Bear. My husband and I were just talking about how The Bear won Best Series, Musical or Comedy, and so we're not 100% sure how The Bear qualified as a musical or a comedy, but,
It wasn't really that fun, was it?
Who are we? We loved The Bear, but we didn't, particularly think it was a musical or a comedy. For someone who wears an awful lot of pink and is quite renowned for my love of all things pink, I'm ashamed to say that I am yet to see Barbie, but I did think Margot Robbie's frock was quite outstanding.
She was stunning, yeah.
Stunning. And I've got the shoes and bag that would match that frock if she ever wants to send it over. Just stunning. But the fact that we did have is it Elizabeth Debicki, who was
who played
Princess
Diana, yes, in The Crown.
And I mean, there were moments watching that it was Diana. It was just extraordinary.
She was good.
She was fantastic. I haven't seen Succession, but it's lovely to see that another Australian won. But I have seen the little highlights of Taylor Swift and her not being too impressed with one of the jokes that was made. I hear that a lot of the jokes fell a bit flat. But I think on the upside, and probably your listeners will agree with me, is that Ricky Gervais won. If you haven't watched Armageddon, do. It's hilarious. And the fact that he just doesn't care and he's too big to be cancelled, I think for some of us who come from a right-of-centre position, who don't buy into cancel culture, who think the woke is just ridiculous, to actually see someone who speaks to the truth in a very, very funny way to be awarded was, maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel.
Armageddon is on my shows to watch from on holidays in a couple of weeks. Great to have you on the show, Hollie. We'll catch up again soon.
Have a great night.
Liberal Senator in New South Wales, Hollie Hughes.